Hare Krishna. Today I'd like to talk about acts of kindness that I witnessed as a refugee. Uh, Everyone knows that this Ukraine crisis is unfolding, and amongst all the horrors that are taking place, I'm also reading about so many wonderful acts of kindness that strangers are offering to other complete strangers. We have people all over Europe, from Scotland to Italy, just taking strangers into their homes. I read about people who are coming with minivans and ferrying people from Kiev and other cities that are under siege under very dangerous conditions and bringing them to safety. There are many people who are donating food, money, and our Krishna consciousness movement in Hungary, we're feeding people at the border, we're feeding people at our temples, we're accommodating refugees with friends, acquaintances in our temples and our Krishna Valley farm. And of course, most of these are just women and children because they don't let the men out. I was a refugee in 1956-57 Hungarian Revolution. And so I can relate to what's going on. I'll just narrate a couple of acts of kindness that I remember. The first one was myself, my mother, my father, and just a guide were crossing from the Hungarian border to the Austrian side. And that was in Traiskirchen in Austria. And we had nothing. We had backpacks. I had my backpack, they had their backpacks. They left everything behind, their homes, their property, their furniture, everything, the whole life they tried to build up after the Second World War, everything was like bang, gone like that. And when we got to the other side, we didn't know anyone. We didn't know where to go, what to do. So I remember my father knocking on one door on the edge of a village, and they refused us entry. This was like, who knows, 2 o'clock in the morning. He knocked on another door, same thing, but on the third door, they opened the door. They let us in. These absolute complete strangers who we woke up in the dead of night, they welcomed us into their home. We stayed there for about 5 days to a week. They fed us, they clothed us, they helped us with everything that they need. They gave us real kindness. And then they directed us to the Red Cross, that was the next sort of act of kindness. Red Cross was taking care of refugees. This whole campus, it was more than just a school, it must be something like a university, or I don't know what it was at that time. We were living there by the hundreds or maybe thousands. There were a lot of people. And the Red Cross fed us, took care of us, and started arranging for places for different people to go. We had a sponsorship from my father's sister in Montreal, Canada. And so that's where we were headed. The next act of kindness was from the Canadian government. They paid to put us on a train. We went to Germany. In Germany, we got on a ship. They had rented an entire ship. And they had sponsored Hungarian refugees to come from Hungary to Canada. And so we landed 2 weeks later in Halifax, and from there we went by train, and we were greeted by my aunt and uncle, Eva and Mati. So that was the Canadian government, and they opened us with welcome arms, just like in the way that the European governments are doing the same. It's really wonderful to see. Of course, we stayed with our relatives, so it's natural that they were very kind to us. But something that I really remember was when I went to, next day my mother took me to school. Now I'd left school in sort of October because of the revolution in Hungary, and I hadn't been to school. Now this is end of February, beginning of March, so I haven't been to school until then. And so my mother took me to school, and their expectation was that they would put me back into grade 1. I would finish grade 1 and then do grade 2 again the next year. I didn't speak a word of English. And then I would continue like that. But what I learned later on when we went home was when my mother took me to the principal, then the principal said, well, he's a pretty big boy. I was already tall for my age. If I put him into first grade, they're really going to laugh at him. That's not very good. Well, let's see what he knows. So he sent my mother out, and he couldn't talk to me, so he just wrote on a paper, 3 times 3, and 12 plus 6. And Hungarian education, I think, was a little ahead of Canadian, so I knew everything. He called my mother back and he said, let's put him into the 2nd grade. He was a person who was really concerned, how would I feel as a growing boy? Would I get some kind of inferiority complex by being laughed at by younger children? And he escorted me along with my mother into the classroom and introduced me to the teacher. The teacher introduced me to the children. And my mother then took me home, so I could start the next day. And in the morning of the next day, there's a knock on our door. And there's this, my age, young blonde boy. My teacher had found out where I lived, and she saw whether there was someone next door. And this boy, Tony, who became my best friend and my best man at my marriage, he said, well, the teacher said that I should come and take care of Peter to school and bring him back and take care of him because he has no friends. And I had no friends. And that was an act of kindness. It was an act of kindness from the teacher. It was an act of kindness. Well, Tony was only 7 years old, too. He was a couple of months younger than me. And his parents became great friends with my parents, one of the best friends. The last was my father. My father actually didn't know any English. My mother knew English. They both also spoke German and Hungarian. So he went without really speaking English. He was a textile chemist. He went to Canadian Textile, it was called. It was a big national textile company. They saw that he was an immigrant, a refugee. Immediately they gave him a job, $75 a week, which was reasonable for someone who didn't even speak the languages yet. And they gave him a position of authority and responsibility. And similarly, my mother went to the place that she continued working with until she retired. And that was, she also got a job. It wasn't as well paying as that, but immediately they took her on. So I'll be forever grateful. I've never forgotten these. You can see 65 years have gone by. And it really sort of molded my life so that when it came time for me to really choose what I wanted to do, I wanted to be a giver. I wanted to do good for other people rather than take. And that's why here I am as a monk in Krishna consciousness. And now I'm in Hungary. And aside from our regular distribution of spiritual knowledge to people that we don't know and food distribution to the needy, now we're trying to help the people in Ukraine. In our crazy world, where there's so much exploitation, violence, it feels really good to receive something from a place, from people where you don't expect it, from strangers. And it also really feels great to do acts of kindness to strangers that you don't know. After all, the Lord is in everybody's heart, and He reciprocates when we do good to others. Hare Krishna.